What's up guys, welcome to this episode of Talking Poodoo, a Star Wars show, where today I'm reviewing the new book Star Wars Poe Dameron Free Fall by Alex Segura. This book is essentially a Poe Dameron origin story. Poe Dameron, a young lad, I think he's meant to be about 16, 17, maybe even 18, grew up on Yavin 4 after the Battle of Endor, after the end of the main war of the Empire, although the war continued. And he's yearning for adventure because all kids that age are. But he's stuck on this planet. His parents, one of which is dead, one of which is a little grumpy and reluctant to let Poe go out on his own. Because, well, he knows what war's like, he knows what the galaxy's like, he knows there could be a lot of trouble and hassle in there. So he's kept Poe on Yavin 4. Poe has become frustrated, he just wants to get out of there, have some fun and get on with his life. And eventually, I say eventually, it's fairly early in the book, this is the whole setup of the book, Poe Dameron meets a young woman called Zori and joins her crew, but he only then finds out that she's a spice runner. So like I said, this is essentially Poe Dameron's origin story. Where he started, what things were like with him, how he became a spice runner, which was mentioned in The Rise of Skywalker, and essentially setting up all the backstory information that is featured in The Rise of Skywalker. So, on the whole, what did I think of this book? I think it's actually alright. It's very fun, very enjoyable, very brisk read. It's not the longest book ever either. So I do think this is the sort of book that most Star Wars fans will be picking up and just having the ball of a time with it. It seems like every chapter is almost like a little adventure that Poe Dameron happened to go on. They are jumping through time a little bit by weeks and months to just to get on with the story, as it were. And it makes for a very enjoyable read. But I would say that a lot of the adventures they go on, a lot of the action scenes and big beats and moments aren't always the most original. They are a little on the generic side. So I think if you've ever seen an action movie before, if you've ever seen a Star Wars movie before, or just like a crime film before, a lot of the scenarios and situations seem to be pulled out of there and given a little Star Wars twisted sort, it seems. But I do think it does a good job of explaining Poe's backstory, showing us how he became such a good pilot, the fact that he was practicing for so long on Yavin, because that's the only thing he could do. It shows us how we learned to do the hyperspace skipping in The Rise of Skywalker, how we got all these contacts in the underworld, and so on and so forth. It does a good job of just explaining these little things, and it does so in fairly interesting, believable ways. As for the themes and messages of this story, this is basically Poe Dameron. He wants to go on adventure. He wants to do good, fun, adventurous action things because hell, he's a kid growing up in this galaxy where he's heard all these stories. Of course he does. He wants to be like all the heroes he's learned. He wants to be like all the heroes that he's listened about and heard about in the stories. I think what this book does well is it really gets to the point of what's the cost of that? Is it worth it, essentially? And it really hammers that home because as soon as he finds out that, oh, he's got this opportunity, he can go on the adventures he wants to, but it means becoming a criminal. It means being a spice runner. So he's constantly having to balance that out. It's like, right, do I want to do this? Well, yeah. But do I want to do it if it means becoming this? Well, and he's constantly juggling those ideas and he's constantly trying to do the adventurous thing while also not being a bad guy. And it does a good job of showing what's going through his head and how he's thinking about all of this. And ultimately, I think it sends a good message to the readers. The book also focuses on Poe's relationship with Zori. As we know in The Rise of Skywalker, they've had a strong personal relationship with suggestions that it was a romantic relationship. This book really dives into that in an interesting way. I'm not going to say it confirms one thing or another, but it seems like their relationship in The Rise of Skywalker is what their relationship was. It was like they're friends, they're risking going maybe to be more than friends, but it doesn't quite get there. And the book does a good job of explaining, at least from Poe's perspective, what he thinks of Zori, what his stance on their relationship is. And their relationship felt very natural, very real. And last thing I want to talk about with the story is just what I thought was the best moment of the whole book is the reveal of the main villain. The main villain is revealed about 2/3 of the way through the book, so fairly late on. And while I'm not a big fan of the main villain, that actual moment of the reveal of like, oh, it's big, it's shocking, there's a big dramatic moment, there's a big surprising moment, it like turns everything on its head, and then all of a sudden the book becomes really like serious and dark and dramatic in one single chapter, hell, maybe even one paragraph. And that's how you reveal a villain. It's just a shame that the villain themselves wasn't great. So let's talk a little bit about the characters. Poe Dameron. The problem I have with Poe Dameron in this book is that he often feels like a young Han Solo. And let's face it, in the sequel trilogy, he's essentially meant to be the new version of Han Solo. Well, in that regard, they've nailed it. But the problem is, I really do feel like you could remove any mention of the word Poe Dameron, replace it with Han Solo, and there you go, you've got a Han Solo novel. So I do think that's a problem. The fact that he is very similar to Han Solo in this particular book is an issue. So Zorii Bliss, not called Zorii Bliss in this, so yeah, there's that. I'm not going to go into why that is, but if you read the book you will soon find out, but it's very clear that it's her. I think she's a well-realized character. While we don't see much from her perspective in this book, I do think it does a good job of showing us what her life is like, or giving us an idea what her life is like. She was born and raised to be a spice runner, basically. It's all she's ever known, it's all she ever wanted to be. It's because that's all there is to her. So Poe Dameron's constantly juggling between being a spice runner and, well, not being a spice runner, being a good guy. Whereas Zorii, it's like spice running is everything to her. It's like there is no other option. It's just what she was meant to do. If she's not a spice runner, then she's nothing. And the book does a good job of explaining that. It does a good job of showing us what exactly her mentality about it all is. The problem I have with Zorii in this is there's a little bit of retconning, I feel, in terms of her backstory. So when we see her in The Rise of Skywalker, she's a spice runner. She's a criminal. We know that. She's got a history with Poe Dameron. But it turns out in this book that maybe there's actually more to her than that. Maybe she's actually a more significant, more important individual than The Rise of Skywalker makes her out to be. She's not just another criminal. She's actually a big player, as it seems. And that I feel like is a little retconny. And why isn't that mentioned in The Rise of Skywalker? Why isn't she portrayed as being more important than what she is here? It's weird, I think. But if you ignore The Rise of Skywalker and just focus on this book, it does add to her character in a good way. It does make her seem more important, it makes her seem more significant. So it works in terms of this book. It's just in the greater continuity, it gets a little weird. There is another character in this book who is essentially the antagonist for like the first 2/3 of the book. And this is a New Republic agent who's hunting down Poe Dameron and hunting down the Spice Runners in particular. The problem is this character's a little bland, a little stereotypical. Their backstory is very well explained in that how the Spice Runners basically killed her family and wiped out her village or whatever. So that's why she became a New Republic agent. That's why she's so focused on taking down the Spice Runners. The problem is that's the only thing we ever find out about this character. And it's a very simple, very straightforward revenge narrative. Not much more than that. So she is a little on the bland side in that regard. It's enough to make us care, it's enough to make us understand what she's doing, but not much else. And it also doesn't help that she only pops up here and there. In fact, she's probably only in like 4 chapters of the whole book. There are huge chunks where we just have no idea what she's up to or what she's doing exactly. So that's an issue, especially when for the first 2/3 of the book, it seems she's the primary antagonist. Sort of. Of course, she is on the good guy side really because Spice Runners are criminals. And ultimately, I feel like this character has only one purpose in this book, and that's to send a message to Poe Dameron about what he's doing and what it could lead to and so on. And they do that. But it does feel like this is a character that serves the story and serves the message of the story rather than a fully fleshed out individual. Similarly, Poe's father and his friend, who were pilots in the rebellion, they keep popping up here and there, and they aren't the most interesting characters either, because it seems his father is very straightforward, like, oh, he's grumpy, he's set in his ways, he doesn't want Poe Dameron going down the dark path, he wants to take care of his son, he wants to keep an eye on him and guide him into a good life, basically. What happened to these characters? That's the problem I'm having here, is that the last time we see them, it looks like things are dire for them. I'm not going to go into spoilers exactly, but we don't ever get any confirmation of what their fate is, what happens to them. I don't know. There's enough there, I think, to make an assumption about what happened to them, but it's never actually confirmed. So that's a bit of a frustrating element. Maybe it's setting up for a sequel or something, I don't know. But it feels like, without going into spoilers again, this book does seem like it feeds right into the Poe Dameron comic book series, although there should be a huge time gap between them two things. So it's weird. This is another instance of where, yeah, it's a Poe Dameron origin story, but then it's syncing up so well with the other stories we've already got that it feels weird that there's this huge time gap. It's like the Han Solo movie, Solo, a Star Wars story. At the end of that movie, he is just the Han Solo we know from the very original Star Wars, and yet there should be like a 15-year time gap. I don't think it's actually 15 years, but you get the point. There's a big time gap where there mustn't have been much happening to him. And the same thing happens here at the end of this book. There mustn't have been much that happened to Poe Dameron between the end of this book and the start of the comic book series. It's weird that way on. But ultimately, outside of Poe Dameron, outside of Zori Bliss, all the characters in this book don't feel like fully fleshed out individuals. They don't feel like real people for the most part. A lot of them just feel like they're there to serve a very specific purpose and to help tell the story. And that's kind of okay when you are focusing so much on Poe and Zori. But there are instances where the focus is shifted to other individuals. Now, just to briefly talk about the villain is bland and boring. I'm not going to say who the villain is because that is getting into spoiler territory, but the villain has a great reveal, a great introduction, like I've mentioned, but they are just a stereotypical crime boss character who rules with like an iron fist, it seems, and there's not much more to them than that. They do have a personal connection with some of the other characters in this book, and that adds a little bit of interest and intrigue there, but not enough. So, I'm going to go into a couple of spoilers in just a bit, so if you haven't read the book, go read the book, come back and watch the rest of this. If you're leaving, no, thanks for watching so far. Make sure to subscribe to my channel to get more content like this. And of course, go over to Twitter and Instagram, follow me at @the_Grant Burton to get all my up-to-date thoughts and opinions as I get them. Until next time though, thanks for watching. If you're sticking around, now for some spoiler points. So full spoilers, you be warned. So Zori's mother, who's the main villain in this book, is also the leader of the Spice Runners, the big boss. Right. That seems weird because there's no mention of this in The Rise of Skywalker. And Zori Bliss isn't presented as a huge major crime boss in The Rise of Skywalker, and yet that's apparently what she is. She's wearing the helmet that her mother wears in this book, which apparently now has greater significance. That helmet apparently is passed down to the rulers of the Spice Runners, which is a really odd, weird thing to make a thing, I think. So it's just weird. Why would you establish this element, which does make Zori's character in this book better, but then not have it link up with the film in such a significant way? It feels like you're really grasping here, and it's something that should have been brought up in the film. Of course, there's always the chance that maybe the Spice Runners aren't quite as big as they used to be. Maybe in the film the Spice Runners aren't a huge gang anymore. Maybe she isn't actually this huge crime boss. Maybe he is just a small little gang or group now. I don't know. But yeah, I do think this element makes the book better, but in the overall continuity, it kind of ruins things a little bit. I'm almost under the impression that this book might have been written or planned or devised before they actually knew Zori Bliss in the films, before they actually saw Zori Bliss in the film, or maybe there is some cut content from the film that explains Zori Bliss's role to a greater extent, and I don't know. So at the end of the book, Poe Dameron has abandoned the Spice Runners, and he's looking to see what's next because he can't really go home because people at home think he's a criminal, they think he's a Spice Runner. He can't go back to the Spice Runners because he's turned their back on them. So what's next? Well, he sees a broadcast from General Leia, I say general, at the time she's actually just Leia. Yeah, she's more princess than general, I suppose. She's a senator. And his turn to suddenly be, oh, I'm going to join this woman, I'm going to go in and form the resistance with this woman, is very sudden. For some reason he looks at Leia as if she's like this angel or like big, all-powerful, godly mother figure. And yet we know that she is essentially a surrogate mother for Poe Dameron. The way in which this is established in this book is very quick, very sudden, very just out of nowhere. Ultimately, I think they just needed a little bit more to set this up and to explain this. But yeah, it does work. It just feels very quick. And that's all the spoilers I'm going to talk about with this book. Like I said, the book is enjoyable, it is fun. I did like it. And yeah, some slight continuity issues here aside. I'm not saying it breaks the continuity, it just, there needs to be a little bit more explanation for it be in the film or in this. And yeah, thanks for watching.